Chapter 1121. I understand. I'll make sure to protect myself. Blood 1 nodded in response. Go on. I wish you a smooth journey. After extending another military salute, Tang Wuling turned around before rising up into the air. The dragon wings on his suit of battle armor spread open, and he glided toward the east. Sima Jinkai, Araheng, Ling Wuyu, Ma Shan, Zhang Wuyu, Long Yakshu, and the 20 other Blood Dragon squad members also rose up into the air before flying into the distance behind him. Cao Daja looked on at their departing figures with a faint smile on his face. A supreme prodigy will complete their metamorphosis to become a dragon as soon as they rise up into the heavens. Wuling, I wish you all the success in the world. We can only give you a helping hand, but how far you can go will depend on you. Zhang Wanyun sighed. You know what? I'm a little sad to see him go. Cao Daja chuckled. You're just sad that he's taking so many of our legion's elite young talents, right? Ahem. Light began to shimmer in Cao Daja's eyes as he mused. It's about time these young people take over the Douluo continent. Let's see just how brightly they'll shine. Zhang Wanyun's brows furrowed slightly. You don't seem to be concerned at all. You should be well aware of just how powerful his future enemies will be. Cao Daja replied in an indifferent voice. How will he continue to improve without powerful opponents to test him? Besides, he's never been fighting alone. Do you really think that just 2 Godslayer missiles can truly destroy the Tang sect and Shrek Academy, both of which have stood at the pinnacle of the continent for over 20,000 years? Zhang Wanyun's expression changed slightly, and he seemed to have gleaned the implications behind Cao Daja's words. Let's go back. I have to further examine the seal. I'm sure the abyssal plane will remain dormant for quite a while after this. That so-called Holy Lord has most likely been severely wounded, and according to our past experience, there may not be another abyssal tide in the next few centuries. Indeed, the abyssal plane had been dealt an extremely heavy blow during this recent battle. 3 of the 108 planar seeds had been completely destroyed, thereby shaking the entire foundation of the plane. Even more abyssal emperors had perished in order to force open the seal, and even though they could be revived in the abyssal plane, their resurrections would take a very long time. It could be said that this was the heaviest blow that had been dealt to the abyssal plane, second only to when they had first invaded the Douluo continent over 6,000 years ago. After that battle, the abyssal plane hadn't attacked the Douluo continent for over 1,000 years, so the Blood God Legion should be given a long time to rest and recuperate following this battle. Furthermore, it was important to remember that the Blood God Legion could enter the abyssal plane through the abyssal passageway at will. Another reason that Cao Daja had agreed for Tang Wuling to depart was in order to prepare for the complete eradication of the threat posed by the abyssal plane in the future. Tang Wuling required more growth and development. He was already a soul sage now, but in the eyes of truly powerful beings, there was still a lot of potential for him to improve. With Tang Wuling's current situation, once he became a tidal Douluo, hyper Douluo, and even limit Douluo, he would pose an extremely potent threat to the abyssal plane. After he reached that level, the threat of the abyssal plane could truly be eradicated for good. They didn't need to destroy the entire abyssal plane. All they had to do was force them to cut off the passageway, and by extension, the connection to the Douluo continent. A heavy aura was permeating throughout a greyish-white world, striking all of the abyssal creatures with a sense of asphyxiation. This situation had already persisted for 3 abyssal days. Every single abyssal level was trembling as the ruler of the entire abyssal plane, the Holy Lord, was in a maddened state of fury. They had failed. Even after making such massive sacrifices, the abyssal plane had still failed in their invasion of the human world. They didn't even manage to kill that man who posed a fundamental threat to the entire abyssal plane. When the Yang Emperor's planar seed had been completely devoured, causing that abyssal level to be destroyed, tremors had run through the entire abyssal plane, and this had happened twice in quick succession. The complete destruction of the 2 planar seeds struck all of the abyssal emperors with an extremely urgent sense of peril. They finally understood why the Holy Lord was determined to find that human and kill him at all costs. That human really was posing a threat to the survival of the entire abyssal plane. The Holy Lord sat on his massive lofty chair with an unmatched aura radiating from its body. The entire abyssal plane was trembling in the face of his peerless might. To the Holy Lord, who was the true ruler of this plane, it was an extremely simple matter to destroy any of the abyssal levels. The 108 abyssal levels were like parts of its body, and the deepest level was the level where its essence lay. At this moment, all of the other abyssal emperors were standing before the Holy Lord. Aside from the Holy Lord, only 84 of the 107 abyssal emperors remained. In order to facilitate that final attack from the Holy Lord, 20 abyssal emperors had to sacrifice themselves in order to produce enough energy to temporarily open up a spatial passageway. The Holy Lord's power was indeed unmatched. However, as the ruler of the abyssal plane, it had to face enormous pressure from an entire plane when it tried to attack an alternate plane. Tang Wuling was able to draw upon so much natural energies through the Blood God array and avoid overexertion, despite wielding far more power than he was capable of. And this was exactly because the entire Douluo continent plane had been protecting him at the time. Otherwise, how could a mere soul emperor like him have played such a significant role during that battle? Despite the heavy price that had been paid by the abyssal plane, Tang Wuling was still alive, and the Holy Lord had even been injured in its attempt to kill him. This was simply unimaginable. The Holy Lord had already been sitting in silence for 3 abyssal days, and no one dared to utter a single sound as a grave atmosphere settled over all of the abyssal emperors. They had always regarded the human world as prey that could be hunted down to elevate the abyssal plane into a divine realm, but could it be that the human world now truly possessed the power to destroy the abyssal plane instead? This was something that they were simply unable and unwilling to accept. That was the power of a god. It was a true godly power. The Holy Lord's voice was very calm and completely emotionless. However, all of the abyssal emperors heaved a collective sigh of relief upon hearing this. At the very least, the Holy Lord had eased the tense atmosphere by breaking the silence. However, was that really the power of a god? How could a godly being exist in the human world? Gods should be entities that existed outside of all of the planes. They were high life forms that all beings on all planes strove to become. The Holy Lord could have become a god a long time ago if it had intended to so. However, as the ruler of a plane, it had many innate advantages, but also extremely severe disadvantages. With the Holy Lord's power, there would be no issue for it to become even a god king if it were willing to ascend into the divine realm of its plane. It possessed absolute power, and all it required was a god seat. However, as the ruler of a plane, it had to face an issue that no other living beings had to face during their journeys to ascension. A planar ruler was the core of an entire plane and ruled over everything within that plane. If the Holy Lord wished to do so, it could even make the entire abyssal plane self-detonate and destroy all of the abyssal creatures within it. The Holy Lord could bend the entire abyssal plane to its will, but due to the fact that it was a planar ruler, it was completely integrated with the entire abyssal plane. In a sense, it could be said that it and the abyssal plane were the same inseparable entity. As such, if it wanted to become a god, then it would have to transform the entire abyssal plane into a brand new divine realm. Setting aside whether that would result in clashes with other existing divine realms, just the energy required to elevate a plane to become a divine realm was downright immeasurable. As such, only through devouring the power and life force energy of other planes could the abyssal plane become more powerful than other divine realms, thereby giving the Holy Lord a chance at ascension. As for the abyssal emperors and abyssal sovereigns, no matter how powerful they became, they wouldn't be able to become godly beings. As long as the abyssal plane didn't become a divine realm, they would never have any hope for ascension. In this regard, the abyssal plane was completely different from the Douluo continent. The Douluo continent didn't have a true planar seed, and all of the planar power had transformed into all types of resources on the Douluo continent, including martial souls, soul beasts, soul masters, humans, plants, oceans, mountains, rivers, etc. These were all constituent parts of the Douluo continent's plane of power, and any living being could earn themselves a chance at becoming a god as long as they could cultivate to the human peak using these resources. Of course, the prerequisite to this was the existence of a divine realm. Chapter 1122. The divine realm that corresponded with the Douluo continent had first made it impossible for soul beasts and animals to become gods, and a long time ago, the divine realm disappeared without a trace. This was why no one had been able to ascend during the past 10,000 years. However, there was definitely more than one person in human history to have ascended to the divine realm, and this was the fundamental difference between the two realms. The Holy Lord had been plotting for countless years, constantly searching for an opportunity to elevate the abyssal plane into a divine realm in one fell swoop. It had been searching for this opportunity for far, far too long, and it had finally found the Douluo continent, a world that was teeming with life force energy. However, much to its surprise, the abyssal plane wasn't able to take over the Douluo continent in the initial battle over 6,000 years ago, and now, their plane was at risk of being attacked by the Douluo continent instead. Holy Lord, was that really the power of a god? Didn't the divine realm that corresponded with the Douluo continent already disappear a long time ago? The Black Sovereign asked in a perplexed manner. If it weren't for the fact that they had sensed that the corresponding divine realm of the Douluo continent had already disappeared, they wouldn't have dared to connect with and invade the Douluo continent plane. The divine realm normally wouldn't interfere with lower realms, but it would definitely intervene if a plane belonging to an alternate divine realm attempted to invade one of its subsidiary realms. The abyssal plane was indeed very powerful, but it was nothing compared to a true divine realm. The Holy Lord replied in an indifferent voice. I'm not sure about the exact details, either, but the power that they released in the end was definitely true godly power. Those two humans perhaps don't possess such godly power, but they possess a godly seed. They were able to draw upon the power of the Douluo plane to forcibly release godly power. Otherwise, how would they have been able to force me back? I truly didn't think that such power existed on the Douluo continent. No wonder that human is able to devour abyssal energy. He has the shadow of a god behind him, and he also possesses the seed of life. After this recent battle, he's become a lot more powerful. If I can find him and devour him, then all of the life forms on the Douluo plane will be forced to relinquish their life force energy to our abyssal plane. A hint of excitement crept into the voice of the Holy Lord as it spoke, and all of the abyssal emperors and abyssal sovereigns were quite surprised. They had thought that the Holy Lord had been in a constant state of extreme fury during the past few abyssal days, but it seems that this was actually not the case. The Holy Lord continued in a cold voice. I've been searching for so many years and finally found a shortcut to elevate our abyssal plane. How could we give up on this opportunity so easily? Human greed is infinite, and we can use that to our advantage to manipulate our human allies into doing our bidding. Get into contact with them, and I'll express our sincerity to them in person. We appear to have failed on this occasion, but in reality, we've discovered where the seed of life of the Douluo continent lies, so this is a huge victory for us. So what if he devours all of you? As long as I can devour him in the end, all of the life force energy on the entire Douluo continent will become a part of our abyssal plane. When that time comes, I'll forcibly elevate our plane into a brand new divine realm. The Holy Lord's wisdom is unmatched. All of the abyssal emperors and abyssal sovereigns knelt down onto the ground to extend respectful salutes. The Black Sovereign lowered her head with a contemplative look in her seductive eyes, and it was impossible to tell what she was thinking. The feeling of flying freely through the air was truly an intoxicating one. After making a breakthrough to become a soul sage and reaching the spirit domain realm, Tang Wuling was able to experience this freedom in far greater depth than before. There seemed to be countless particles of all types of elements revolving around him in an elated manner. The wind elements were carrying his body, the water and fire elements were dancing around him, the light elements were nourishing his body. All of this made Tang Wuling feel as if the entire world had completely changed. Was this the true Douluo continent? After receiving the blessings of the entire Douluo continent plane, he had naturally made a breakthrough to the spirit domain realm. At the same time, his sensory of all elements had become countless times more potent than in the past, and he possessed a level of elemental affinity that was far superior to all other soul masters. This was the result of the blessing of the entire plane, and this made it far easier for him to absorb natural energies. As particles of all elements surged naturally through his body, he basked in the pleasure of being one with nature. He couldn't help but heave an internal sigh as he thought back to how difficult things had been for him when he had first begun his cultivation journey. Back then, he had put in more effort than anyone else, yet only reaped a fraction of the rewards. He could still recall the crushing pain and disappointment when he had purchased Goldsong with the money that he had earned so arduously over such a long time. At the time, he truly considered giving up on cultivation. After all, he only possessed a trash martial soul, and even the soul spirit that he had purchased with his hard-earned money was a defective one. Thankfully, he persevered in the end. His forging had taught him the importance of persistence, and his resolute will had allowed him to finally reach the point that he was at today. All of this was naturally directly related to the golden dragon king seals within his body, but his persistent efforts and unbreakable will had been even more important. Now, he could finally consider himself to be a powerful cultivator, and he could finally set off in search of his parents, as well as her. No matter how difficult the road ahead was going to be, he was definitely going to overcome all obstacles that came his way. No matter what kind of arduous circumstances he encountered, nothing would be an issue as long as his will and spirit remained strong. Jiang Wuyu looked on at Tang Wuling, who was flying up ahead, and a sense of powerlessness welled up in his heart. When he had first met Tang Wuling, the latter was still just a newbie, yet he was already a battalion commander at the time. During their first sparring session, there didn't seem to be that much of a gap between them, but as time passed, Tang Wuling continued to grow at a constant, insane rate. His rate of growth was simply terrifying and unfathomable to Jiang Wuyu. During the most recent battle, Jiang Wuyu had witnessed Tang Wuling's fearless power in person. While it was indeed true that he had drawn upon the power of the blood god array, the fact of the matter was that he had opposed the entire abyssal plane on his own. At the very least, that was what had happened in Jiang Wuyu's eyes. In the past, he had regarded Tang Wuling as his rival in love, but that notion had already been completely swept out of his mind. How could they be rivals when they weren't even on the same level? Thankfully, he already had a girlfriend. Was the woman who had appeared near the conclusion of the battle his girlfriend? In that case, with that in mind, Jiang Wuyu turned to appraise Long Yakshu, who was flying beside him. Aside from Tang Wuling, Sima Jinkai, and Araheng, everyone else was flying in black mechas. After all, it was quite taxing to fly for extended periods of time for all soul masters below the soul sage level, even if they were to wear their suits of battle armor. The main benefit of using a mecha was that it didn't exhaust the mecha pilot's power. Long Yakshu's black mecha was filled with a sense of streamlined beauty. Compared to others, her newly constructed black mecha was very delicate and graceful in appearance. It was only around 7 meters tall, and it was very lithe and slender, just like her captivating figure. Aside from a massive soul gun, the mecha had no other weapons that were outwardly displayed. This gun was over 8 meters in length, and it had to be carried on a slant, even on the back of her black mecha. The gun was entirely dark blue in color with countless fine symbols inscribed on its surface. The barrel of the gun alone exceeded 3 meters in length, and in reality, it was more appropriate to call it a cannon than a gun. Even with Jiang Wuyu's powers, he was struck by a sense of sharp pain all over his body at the mere sight of that thing. Long Yakshu also had her eyes fixed on Tang Wuling as she flew through the air in her mecha, and compared to Jiang Wuyu's powerlessness and dejection, her heart was filled with far more complex emotions. Chapter 1123. It's no wonder that he doesn't want me. His lover is so beautiful and powerful in equal measure. She had seen the exquisitely gorgeous woman with silver hair and purple eyes with her very own eyes. At the time, she had appeared out of thin air beside Tang Wuling and fused as one with him during his time of dire need. They had only stood beside one another for a very short time, but Long Yakshu could clearly see that during that brief period of time, they only had eyes for each other. She had never seen such an expression from Tang Wuling before. Even though his eyes were filled with astonishment at the time, the shock was intermingled with boundless passion. His heart was only big enough to contain her, and she was so exceptional and powerful. But why did she leave? She left without saying anything to anyone, and Long Yakshu hadn't even learned her name. Only a woman like her was worthy of him. Even Long Yakshu herself wasn't sure why she had insisted on being a part of the group that was selected to accompany Tang Wuling on his journey. She had told her father that she wanted to broaden her own horizons by seeing the outside world, but was that really the truth? She was naturally aware of how Jiang Wuyu felt about her, but one's first love was always going to be their first choice. She knew that it was impossible for a relationship to blossom between them, but he was her first love, and she was still unwilling to give up on him, despite her better judgment. He was a major general and the captain of the Blood Dragon squad, while she was only his subordinate, so it couldn't be a bad thing for her to follow him and see more of the world. In contrast with everyone else, Araheng and Sima Jinkai's thought process was completely different. They flew out of the snowy mountain ranges behind Tang Wuling in an extremely eager manner, and the first feeling that they were struck by was a sense of freedom. In that instant, these two burly man mountains were struck by the urge to weep tears of joy. They were finally free. They had almost been executed under the most farcical circumstances imaginable. In their eyes, the Blood God Legion base was like hell on earth, and they never wanted to come back to this place for as long as they lived. At the same time, their hearts were filled with gratitude toward Tang Wuling. If he hadn't swooped in to save them, then they would have truly been in a lot of danger. Aside from them, most of the other members of Tang Wuling's Blood Dragon squad were around 30 years of age, and they were all among the elite of the elite in the younger generation of the Blood God Legion. For them, leaving the Blood God Legion was a very new and exciting experience. It had been so long since they'd left the Legion base that they'd almost forgotten what the outside world was like. In reality, almost all of the soldiers in the Legion wanted to join the Blood Dragon squad. Aside from a desire to follow the heroic Blood Dragon who had saved the entire Legion, they also wanted to see the outside world as well. This was particularly true for the younger soldiers of the Legion. All of them had heavy responsibilities on their shoulders, but if given the opportunity, who wouldn't want to go and explore the outside world? Now that they were finally able to leave the Legion base, all of them were filled with excitement. Tang Wuling was flying at the forefront of the group, and all of a sudden, he seemed to have sensed something and began to decelerate in his flight. In order to further sense his spirit domain realm spiritual power. He had released his spiritual aura to its maximal extent as he flew through the air so he could sense the largest area possible. This was a spiritual power cultivation method that Cao Daja had taught him. After one's spiritual power reached a certain level, the best way to continue to cultivate it was to constantly search for their limits. Just now, Tang Wulin had suddenly sensed an extraordinary burst of blood essence fluctuations through his spiritual power. What was that? The blood essence fluctuations were even more powerful than his own. This was simply unimaginable. Tang Wulin's brows furrowed tightly as he cast his gaze into the distance. These blood essence fluctuations were far more powerful than his own, and if it weren't for his immensely powerful spiritual power, he may not even have been able to sense the fluctuations. What kind of powerful being was this? Why was there such a powerful being here in the westernmost region of the continent? Those blood essence fluctuations didn't seem to belong to a human at all. He and his senior disciple brother, Arahang, already possessed the most powerful blood essence fluctuations among the human race. However, the blood essence fluctuations that he had just sensed were more powerful than his and Arahang's combined. Tang Wulin raised a hand, and everyone immediately slowed down slightly. Arahang arrived beside Tang Wulin and asked, "What is it?" Junior disciple brother. Tang Wulin pointed toward a certain direction and replied, "There seems to be an extremely powerful being over in that direction. Should we avoid them or why would we do that? Let's go and have a look." Arahang's eyes lit up before he immediately flew toward the direction Tang Wulin was pointing in without any hesitation. He was still filled with pent-up fury from the mistreatment he had received at the Blood God Legion, and he wanted nothing better than to clash with a powerful being to vent his frustrations. He was initially planning to spar with Tang Wulin, but Tang Wulin had just saved him and Sima Jinkai, and it didn't seem right for him to challenge his savior. Now that they had encountered a powerful being, he certainly wasn't going to shy away from battle. "Wait for me, senior disciple brother." Tang Wulin hurriedly flapped his wings to catch up to Arahang. The blood essence fluctuations in that direction were far beyond the normal threshold. Everyone else also hurriedly followed along. Right at this moment, a loud roar suddenly rang out in the direction that Tang Wulin had detected the blood essence fluctuations from. Roar. In the instant the roar rang out, everyone was struck by the imagery of a gigantic primordial beast stretching its body. In the distance, a layer of dark golden light appeared, and even the natural light in the sky dimmed slightly. Long Yakshu couldn't help but cover her mouth with her hand in astonishment as she sat in her mecha's pilot room. Good heavens! What kind of being was that? How could it possibly be capable of releasing such a fearsome aura? Even Arahang, who was flying at the forefront, immediately drew to an abrupt halt as a stunned look appeared on his face. Just that roar alone was enough to shake the entire heavens. Just how powerful did one have to be before they could unleash an aura of this caliber? Tang Wulin stopped beside Arahang, and for some reason, the roar and aura struck him with a faint sense of familiarity. Sima Jinkai arrived on Tang Wulin's other side, and mused, "Is it coming for us?" A hint of befuddlement had also appeared in Tang Wulin's eyes. They had only just left the Blood God Legion base, which was extremely obscure and confidential. So why was there such an unfathomably powerful being in this area? The first thing they could be sure of was that this wasn't an abyssal creature. Such a powerful abyssal creature wouldn't be able to break through the new seal on the abyssal passageway anyway. Secondly, this definitely wasn't an evil soul master, either, as this being's blood essence fluctuations were simply far too powerful. It was like a small sun that was filled with an extreme yang attribute aura, one that no evil soul master could possibly possess. However, he couldn't recall having any enemies aside from evil soul masters and powerful beings from the abyssal plane. Furthermore, was it really a coincidence that they had encountered this powerful being as soon as they left the snowy mountain ranges? Could it be that this was a powerful being that had just emerged from seclusion? Tang Wulin shook his head and said, "Let's avoid a confrontation." He had extremely heavy responsibilities on his shoulders, and this unknown powerful being was clearly extremely fearsome. As such, it was best to avoid them and move on. However, some things simply couldn't just be avoided at will. Just as Tang Wulin was preparing to lead everyone toward another direction, the being that was exuding the insanely powerful blood essence fluctuations seemed to have also discovered them. The powerful blood essence fluctuations almost instantly began to travel toward them at an incredible speed, and from a bird's eye perspective, it looked as if there were an extremely bright ball of dark golden light hurtling toward them. Is it really here for us? Arahang raised an eyebrow. Tang Wulin's brows furrowed slightly. Everyone, get ready for battle. All of the Blood God Legion soldiers accompanying him had extremely extensive battle experience, and they quickly got into the ideal formation even without any further instructions from him. The 24 black mechas quickly dispersed before adopting different positions depending on their respective strengths. The mechas fanned out in a semicircular formation with Tang Wulin's trio at the very center, and Zhang Wuyu positioned his black mecha in front of Long Yakshu in a very natural manner. Meanwhile, Long Yakshu's mecha picked up a massive soul gun on its back before carrying the gun on its shoulder. A hint of blue light began to flash from the surface of the huge gun, and it also began to emit a faint buzzing sound. Ma Shan had situated himself in front of Ling Wuyu, and his black mecha was wielding a pair of gigantic hammers, ones that were even larger than the pair that Tang Wulin had once used. The hammers were shimmering with faint azure light, and they weren't as simple as their appearance suggested. Both hammers had high-frequency vibration capabilities, and that, in conjunction with Ma Shan's fearsome strength, will allow the hammers to smash through even a black mecha's protective barrier. A faint smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face, and he circled his arms in front of him as a burst of golden radiance appeared around him while his suit of two-word battle armor appeared over his own body. Chapter 1124. Following the evolution he had recently undergone, his suit of two-word battle armor had become more dazzling than ever, and he instantly became the core of the entire Blood Dragon squad. In particular, everyone was struck by a sense of reinvigoration as his golden dragon sphere appeared in his hand, and this feeling was most pronounced for Arahang and Sima Jinkai, who were standing right beside him. They had both fought Tang Wulin during the recently concluded competition, so they had thought that they were quite familiar with Tang Wulin's powers. However, as Tang Wulin released his weapon and battle armor before them, they suddenly felt as if he had become a completely different person. His aura. Both Arahang and Sima Jinkai were quite stunned by his growth. There was a very peculiar sensation being released from Tang Wulin's body. It wasn't as powerful as the blood essence fluctuations in the distance, but what was quite alarming was that they couldn't even sense Tang Wulin's existence unless they were to look directly at him. Was this what it was like to become one with nature? However, one had to possess spirit domain realm spiritual power before they could enter this state, so only extremely powerful beings with immense spiritual power could achieve this state of oneness with nature. Even Sima Jinkai could only accomplish this when releasing his saber intent and saber repulse. He definitely couldn't enter this state as easily as Tang Wulin could. The competition had only just concluded a few days ago. How had he become this powerful already? Sima Jinkai and Arahang exchanged a glance with one another, and both of them could see their own confusion mirrored in each other's eyes. Their astonishment was exacerbated even further at the sight of the 7 soul rings that were slowly rising up around Tang Wulin. There were 4 black, 1 greenish golden, and 2 orange golden soul rings. The first thought that occurred to the two of them was, did Tang Wulin really come from the Douluo continent? This soul ring configuration shouldn't be something that a normal soul master could attain. They had heard of orange golden soul rings in the past, but what was that green one all about? Before they had a chance to delve deeper into this matter, the dark golden ball of light had appeared in their field of view before suddenly rising up into the air like a cannonball. In the instant that it rose up into the heavens, a deafening boom rang out from the ground down below. From the air above, one could clearly see that the ground down in a diameter of around 100 meters had caved in significantly, as if it had just been stomped on by a terrifying gargantuan creature. The dark golden ball of light reached everyone in the blink of an eye before stopping and revealing its true appearance to be an extremely burly man. Arahang was already quite muscular and imposing, but even he was completely dwarfed by this man, both in height and musculature. There was a layer of faint golden color on the surface of the man's skin, and he was only wearing a singlet, revealing a pair of thick muscle-bound arms that were comparable to mecha arms. His entire body was radiating extremely powerful blood essence fluctuations, and his eyes were shimmering with a vicious light. Even in the face of over 20 black mechas, he still remained completely unfazed. He then quickly caught sight of Tang Wulin, upon which his eyes immediately lit up. Are you Tang Wulin? His voice was very deep and filled with an indescribable sense of power. I am. Who are you? Through his immense spiritual power, Tang Wuling was instantly able to sense that this man didn't harbor any benevolence toward him at all. I am Bear Lord, and you can refer to me as such. I'll give you a chance to commit suicide so I won't have to dirty my hands, Bear Lord said in a nonchalant manner. Even before Tang Wuling had a chance to say anything, Arahang immediately flared up with rage. Who the hell do you think you are? Arahang had quite a fiery temper to begin with, and he was extremely frustrated by the mistreatment he'd recently received. So even though he was aware that this was an extremely powerful being, he still charged into battle without any hesitation. Powerful blood essence fluctuations abruptly erupted from Arahang's body, perfectly exemplifying the might of the body sex congenital secret method. Even though he only had a very short distance to cover, Arahang still left a trail of after images in his wake while all of the other members of the Blood Dragon squad looked on from behind him. His fist reached Bear Lord in virtually the blink of an eye, and his extraordinary strength had even torn through space, causing the surrounding air to twist and warp violently. A hint of disdain appeared on Bear Lord's face, and he instantly raised his left hand before his palm turned into a dark golden color. Bam! A muffled thump erupted from Bear Lord's palm, and violent shockwaves immediately erupted forth alongside a layer of powerful reddish golden light. Tang Wuling and Sima Jinkai's pupils contracted almost in complete unison as they could see that Arahang's immensely powerful punch struck Bear Lord's palm, but the latter didn't even move so much as a single inch. He was like an impregnable fortress that remained completely unmoved by Arahang's strength. A cold smile appeared on Bear Lord's face, and he suddenly brought his fingers together to clamp down on Arahang's fist in his own hand. Crack! The sound of cracking bones made everyone wince involuntarily. Arahang had cultivated arduously for so many years before finally completing the body sex congenital secret method and attaining such a powerful body. Yet his right fist had been completely crushed by Bear Lord's palm. This was downright unimaginable, and Tang Wuling's expression darkened as he instantly sprang into action. He flapped his wings, and his body shot forth like a shooting star while his spear was thrust toward Bear Lord like a bolt of golden lightning. He didn't know why he was being targeted by Bear Lord, but at a time like this, he could only go into battle. Bear Lord swept his left hand through the air to toss Arahang away, sending him hurtling directly towards Sima Jinkai, who had sprung into action almost at the exact same moment as Tang Wuling. At the same time, he thrust his right hand toward Tang Wuling. Only when truly facing Bear Lord was Tang Wuling able to sense just how terrifying he was. There didn't seem to be anything special about Bear Lord's attack, but in reality, when his palm reached Tang Wuling, the latter felt as if there were a massive mountain crashing toward him. He was instantly struck by a sense of asphyxiation. There seemed to be no way to escape this palm. He felt as if he were about to be reduced to dust, and his expression darkened even further. In the past, he would have had no choice but to think of a way to fall back and take evasive measures in this situation. However, he was no longer the same Tang Wuling that he once was after integrating all of the fruits that he'd reaped during his battle against the Abyssal Plane. A loud dragon's roar erupted out of his mouth, and his golden dragon king bloodline fluctuations were fully unleashed. His dragon core contracted violently before expanding, then contracting again, and extremely powerful blood essence fluctuations radiated from his body. He began to emit an unimaginably powerful aura, and a huge golden dragon head emerged with his body at its very center. Even with Bear Lord's extraordinary powers, he couldn't help but be slightly alarmed by that thunderous golden dragon roar. This golden dragon roar made him feel as if he were facing the golden dragon king itself, and the fearlessly powerful blood essence fluctuations forcibly restricted Bear Lord's bloodline aura, causing his palm to falter slightly as he thrust it through the air. Right at this moment, Tang Wuling's golden dragon spear reached him, and the massive golden dragon head had already transformed into a giant dragon. The dragon then immediately opened its mouth in an attempt to devour Bear Lord whole. After inventing path of regal domination and all or nothing, Tang Wuling's 9 arts of the golden dragon had undergone a complete transformation. His golden dragon roar transitioned into golden dragon shocks the heavens, and at the same time, he unleashed his blood soul fusion skill. His soul power and bloodline power instantly combined before erupting forth, and it was as if countless bluish golden giant dragons had fused into his spear strike. The aura of the giant golden dragon drew a slight change in even Bear Lord's expression, and he clenched his palm into a fist as he let loose an explosive cry. Boom! Terrifying energy fluctuations wreaked havoc through the air. Chapter 1125. Tang Wuling appeared to have unleashed a very simple spear strike, but it was actually a combination of his blood soul fusion skill, golden dragon spear, and unyielding will. He was only a 7-ring soul sage, but with the enhancements from his suit of 2-word battle armor, his powers were comparable to those of a titled Douluo. In addition, he possessed several types of extremely powerful abilities, and even a hyper Douluo would likely struggle to force him back. A terrifying explosion of energy erupted in the air. Sima Jinkai had just caught Arahang, and the two of them were sent flying for several dozens of meters. They managed to right themselves in midair just in time to witness Tang Wuling unleashing his devastating attack, and they discovered that his golden dragon spear was exceeding an overbearing intent that they had never seen during the competition. He was like a powerful eagle that was soaring through the heavens, unwilling to back down in the slightest even against the most fearsome of opponents. The golden dragon spear was repelled upward amid a resounding boom, and the giant golden dragon seemed to have already devoured Bear Lord. However, in the next instant, the golden light dissipated to reveal Bear Lord's true body. Tang Wuling's face was slightly pale, but his spear wielding was still firm and steady. I really didn't think that you'd become powerful enough to take a punch from me in such a short time. It's no wonder that boss wants me to kill you as soon as possible. I now understand his reasoning. You've earned yourself the right to witness my true power. Bear Lord suddenly spread open his muscle-bound arms as he spoke, and a series of dark golden blades instantly sprang out of his fingertips. At the same time, his aura swelled drastically, and his body instantly expanded as he transformed into a terrifying giant bear that was over 100 meters tall in the blink of an eye. His dark golden claws also expanded along with his body, reaching over 30 meters in length each. Even the perpetually headstrong Arahang, Sima Jinkai, Ma Shan, and Jiang Wu couldn't help but draw a sharp breath in unison upon seeing this. The creature standing before them was like a vicious deity who was capable of tearing through the heavens and crushing the earth. Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear. Tang Wuling exclaimed. He finally understood why this man's aura was so familiar to him. Back in the Spirit Ascension Plane, he had once encountered a Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear and obtained a right-hand soul bone from it, which had greatly enhanced his powers. Your martial soul is the Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear. A grave tone had crept into Tang Wuling's voice. He was naturally aware of just what a Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear entailed. From what he had been taught in Shrek Academy, this type of martial soul was comparable to giant dragons. However, there seems to be no human soul masters in history who possessed Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear martial souls, and this was simply because this type of soul beast was far too ferocious. 1,000-year-old Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear could easily destroy normal 10,000-year-old soul beasts, and they truly stood at the very top of the soul beast food chain. Martial soul? That's something that only accursed humans like you possess. All humans deserve to die. Bear Lord didn't have any intention of wasting time with words, and he immediately swept his terrifying dark golden claws horizontally through the air. His claws truly seemed to be capable of tearing through the heavens, and in the instant that they were unleashed, fearsome claw projections swept through an area with a radius of 500 meters. Not only were Tang Wuling, Arahang, and Sima Jinkai caught in the scope of this attack, even the 24 black mechas that were situated further away were also encompassed within the range of this attack. The sky abruptly dimmed, and in that instant, it was as if Armageddon had descended upon the Blood Dragon squad. This is a limit Douluo. This thought suddenly occurred to Tang Wuling. This Bear Lord's powers were already comparable to those of a limit Douluo, and on top of that, he was a Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear. That's right, he had just said humans like you, so it was extremely likely that this man was actually an extremely powerful Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear. Did such powerful soul beasts really exist in this world? Furthermore, this Bear Lord seemed to be targeting him. All of these thoughts flashed through Tang Wuling's mind in an instant. With his current powers, abilities, and 2-word battle armor, Tang Wuling was confident that he could even face a hyper Douluo in battle. But this enemy was clearly far more fearsome than a hyper Douluo. This was Bear Lord, the ruler of the Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear, and one of the very few great beasts that still remained on this continent. It was truly displaying its fearsome might now, and even though it was only unleashing a single attack, everyone was struck by the feeling that the sky was falling down onto them. Tang Wuling took a deep breath, and a grave look instantly appeared on his face. He couldn't back down. He was the core of the Blood Dragon squad, and if he were to back down now, everyone behind him would be struck by Bear Lord's devastating attack. Even now, he would still have a chance to evade the oncoming attack if he were to retreat right away. However, retreat had already become a foreign concept to him from the moment he invented path of regal domination and all or nothing. No matter how how powerful and overbearing his enemies were, he could only continue to forge ahead and establish his own path of regal domination. A lab dragons were instantly erupted from his dragon moon battle armor, and a huge golden dragon projection also surfaced behind him. The golden dragon spear in his hand began to glow with scintillating light, and it was as if he had transformed into a golden sun. Elemental particles of all different attributes in the air converged toward him in a frenzy, and even a tidal Douluo wouldn't be able to match his current level of power. Countless streaks of golden light instantly erupted forth, and in that instant, Tang Wulin's mind was completely devoid of all thoughts aside from the spear in his hand. Every single streak of golden light was like an actual golden dragon spear, and all of them instantly tracked down the trajectories of the dusk gold dreadclaws as they surged through the air. Each and every spear strike was aimed at the most resolute sections of the dusk gold dreadclaws with unerring accuracy, and even though the golden spear projections were all destroyed by the devastating dusk gold dreadclaws, the claws were slowed down as a result of the clash. Furthermore, Tang Wulin wasn't fighting on his own. The sound of a violent heartbeat rang out from Tang Wulin's right side, and Arahang's body instantly swelled to over 10 meters tall. The sound of his heartbeat was akin to muffled thunderclaps as he unleashed his blood essence fluctuations with all his might, and there were faint crimson flames burning around his body. His peerlessly powerful blood essence seemed to have set his body alight, and he knew that this was the most powerful enemy he had ever faced, so he didn't dare to hold back at all. A layer of crimson golden color appeared over his skin, and he hurtled forth toward Bear Lord from the side like a shooting star. At this point, Sima Jinkai had also released his dragon-slaying saber. A shrill dragon's roar of grief erupted throughout the entire heavens, and a gargantuan evil dragon emerged. Its anguished howls provided a whetstone that sharpened the dragon-slaying saber, and the saber seemed to be threatening to part heaven and earth as it was swept through the air. Peerless unstoppable intent was injected into the saber soul, and Sima Jinkai's body had completely disappeared. He had unleashed his seventh soul skill, his dragon-slaying true body, and his saber soul had manifested itself in the form of an infernal hell. At the same time, the 24 black mechas also unleashed their attacks in unison. All of the melee combat mechas positioned themselves in front of the long-range attacking mechas, and there just so happened to be 12 of each. Long Yakshu's heavy sniper soul cannon had already locked onto its target, and the blue light flowing over the surface of the massive soul cannon was becoming more and more pronounced. Just as Bear Lord's dusk gold dreadclaws were about to reach everyone, this fearsome soul cannon finally fired its first shot. A dark blue laser beam silently shot forth, and there was no resounding boom, nor any powerful aura being released. Despite the weapon's enormous size, the laser beam it released was only about as thick as a human finger. In fact, one could easily miss the laser beam altogether unless they were to focus their attention on it. The dark blue beam of light reached Bear Lord's chest in a flash, and there wasn't even any need to aim as Bear Lord's 100-meter tall body provided a gigantic target. Tang Wulin's spear projections were only able to slightly oppose Bear Lord's dusk gold dreadclaws, but the claw projections were still converging inward. However, his efforts hadn't been in vain. At the very least, he had bought the 24 black mechas behind him enough time to retreat to outside the range of the attack. Bear Lord didn't pay much heed to this. He was only targeting Tang Wulin anyway, and as long as he could kill Tang Wulin, it didn't matter to him even if all of the other humans escaped. However, right at this moment, a sharp pain suddenly shot through his chest. Bear Lord's expression stiffened slightly, and a layer of dense dark golden light instantly erupted from his dark golden fur. The forte of a dusk gold dreadclaw bear lay in their defensive and offensive prowess, and even though he didn't possess any long-range attacks, it was no exaggeration to say that he was the king of close quarters combat. Bear Lord had already become one of the 10 great beasts tens of thousands of years ago, and he was ranked very high on the list. Aside from the Lord of all soul beasts, the only one who drew genuine respect from him was the leader of the 10 great beasts. Chapter 1126. He had never paid much heed to human attacks, and even a limit Douluo would have a hard time trying to harm him. Thump. All of a sudden, Bear Lord's body shattered slightly, and an incredulous look appeared in his massive eyes. His sharp claws abruptly faltered in midair, and an enormous burst of dark golden energy erupted forth as a massive explosion, immediately sending Tang Wulin, Arahang, and Sima Jinkai flying backward in unison. Tang Wulin had already prepared a trump card, but he didn't even get a chance to unleash it. He had originally planned to unleash the blood soul fusion skill version of his Fury of the Masses, and even though there was no way that would be able to keep Bear Lord's attack at bay, he was preparing to combine his Fury of the Masses with all or nothing to unleash a kamikaze attack against Bear Lord. His spear projections were constantly being forced back, but in reality, he was borrowing Bear Lord's power to compress his spear intent to the greatest possible extent. However, Bear Lord was simply far too powerful, and even Tang Wulin didn't know whether his final kamikaze attack would be able to harm him. However, what he was sure of was that there was at least an 80% chance that his body would be torn into pieces by Bear Lord. However, right at this moment, a startling turn of events suddenly unfolded. A burst of vibrational force abruptly erupted from Bear Lord's dusk gold dreadclaws, and it did indeed send them flying, but it didn't actually inflict any damage upon them. Bear Lord's eyes were wide with astonishment, and at this moment, his gaze was no longer fixed on Tang Wulin. Instead, his attention had turned to Long Yakshu's black mecha, and the massive gun that was sitting on its shoulder. What was that? What kind of attack was that? A sense of fear, which had been a foreign concept to Bear Lord for countless years, suddenly welled up in his heart in the face of this human weapon, which he had completely disregarded earlier. What is that? Bear Lord was completely befuddled. He hadn't felt his defenses being struck by any particularly heavy impacts, but the sense of sharp pain had suddenly exploded directly within his own body. If it weren't for the fact that he had cultivated his internal organs to be just as defensively astute as his skin and muscles, his body would have most likely exploded from the inside. Even so, the completely inconspicuous laser beam had truly hurt him. If it weren't for the fact that he had instinctively shifted the location of his heart within his own body just in the nick of time, there was a chance that his heart would have been punctured. Right at this moment, the other 11 long-range attacking mechas also unleashed their attacks in unison. 2 massive boomerangs sliced through the air, while the other 10 black mechas all unleashed the same attacks, sending 10 crimson laser beams hurtling toward Bear Lord at the same time. Bear Lord's body was far too massive, and the light was far too fast for him to evade, so he could only bolster his defenses to the very max. However, as those red beams of light came into contact with his body, he was struck by the same feeling as before. His defenses didn't seem to have been afflicted by any heavy blows, but a string of loud booms was constantly erupting from within his body. Compared to the blue laser beam from before, these red laser beams were significantly weaker, but they were still truly harming him. The strong scorching sensation drew an involuntary roar of pain and fury from Bear Lord's mouth, and even Tang Wulin, Arahang, and Sima Jinkai were completely flabbergasted. What was going on? This was a powerful being who was virtually comparable in power to a limit Douluo. How could he be having this much trouble against attacks from black mechas? From the looks of it, these attacks seemed to be impacting him quite significantly, and they couldn't help but wonder what kind of attacks were being unleashed by these Blood God Legion black mechas. If these attacks were capable of harming even limit Douluo level soul beasts, how would they fare against this fearsome assault? Arahang and Sima Jinkai were most alarmed by this as they had almost been executed in the Blood God Legion base. Arahang was extremely confident in the power of his own body, but there was clearly still a significant gap between his and Bear Lord's physical constitutions. Just how powerful were these long-range attacks to be causing so much trouble even for Bear Lord? Bear Lord's body instantly began to shrink as if it were a punctured balloon. As one of the most powerful great beasts in existence, he possessed intelligence that was not inferior to humans in the slightest. As such, he immediately decided to shrink down so that he wouldn't be as massive a target for these laser beams. At the very least, this would allow him to evade some attacks. Immediately after shrinking down to his original size, Bear Lord switched targets and rushed directly toward Long Yakshu, who had harmed him the most. If one were to look closely, they would discover that there was blood pouring out of Bear Lord's mouth, and this was a result of the internal injuries inflicted on him by none other than Long Yakshu's massive soul gun. This sudden development was quite astonishing to Tang Wulin, but he still managed to react very quickly. Roar! A thunderous dragon's roar rang out from Tang Wulin's mouth as he unleashed his golden dragon roar. At the same time, his eyes suddenly became extremely bright, and his pupils turned vertical as a burst of invisible might abruptly erupted from his body. This was his dragon's might. This was the first time he had unleashed this golden dragon king, an ability after progressing to the soul stage level and attaining his martial soul true body. His dragon's might erupted forth, and all of the surrounding space instantly turned into a faint golden color. The golden dragon projection behind him also became more substantial, and its golden eye suddenly turned crimson as it appraised Bear Lord with an enraged expression. Bear Lord was in a state of extremely violent rage due to the injuries that he just sustained, but even in this state, he couldn't help but shudder as the pair of crimson eyes locked onto him. This was the same feeling he had been struck by when the Lord of all soul beasts had first emerged from underground seclusion, and he almost fell to his knees before the golden dragon projection. This, in addition to the dragon god aura that had appeared not long ago, evoked a sense of fear within Bear Lord's heart, and the violent rage in his heart abated slightly, causing his movements to naturally slow down as a result. Boom! A crimson golden figure crashed into Bear Lord from the side. Arahang and Sima Jinkai had a common trait, which was their love for battle, and all people who loved to battle shared a common trait, which was that all of them possessed extensive battle experience. Neither of them knew why Bear Lord had suddenly slowed down, but they clearly weren't going to let slip such a brilliant opportunity. Following the intimidation from Tang Wulin's dragon smite, Arahang crashed into Bear Lord's body, and at this point, he had already donned his suit of battle armor. Arahang was already extremely close to the title Douluo level, and with his suit of battle armor and the body sex congenital secret method, he could put up a good fight even against a hyper Douluo. His body crashed into Bear Lord like a fiery crimson cannonball, and despite Bear Lord's immense powers, even he was sent flying for over 10 meters. Right at this moment, a dazzling saber projection also descended toward him from above. Only then did Bear Lord return to his senses, and he raised his right hand to grab the massive dragon-slaying saber. Clang! A thunderous dragon's roar of anguish rang out, and Bear Lord was struck by a bleak, chilling sensation. He felt as if there were countless giant dragons being felled right before his very eyes, and that all of the resentment and hatred from those fallen giant dragons were being directed at him. It was also right at this moment that Tang Wulin's dragon smite abruptly became more powerful, and a burst of golden light instantly erupted forth, forming what appeared to be a golden path. As the golden path passed through Bear Lord's body, he was struck by an indescribable sense of regal domination, causing his own aura to deflate at a rapid rate. Even his body faltered momentarily as a result of this, and he was then greeted by the sight of Tang Wulin, who had donned a suit of golden armor with a golden visor concealing his handsome face, while a pair of dragon wings had spread open on his back. At this moment, it was as if Tang Wulin's body had expanded to infinity and beyond. The symbols on his golden dragon spear began to glow with scintillating golden light, and all of the anguished giant dragons on the dragon-slaying saber immediately bowed in subordination toward him upon sensing this aura. Chapter 1127. The dragon-slaying saber also instantly turned into a golden color, and 9 giant dragons rose up from its blade, causing Sima Jinkai's body to also adopt the same golden hue. Bear Lord had originally already locked the dragon-slaying saber firmly in his grasp, but he was suddenly struggling to hold on. A golden halo also proliferated from Tang Wulin's body, and the lavish golden halo instantly encompassed the entire battlefield along with his powerful bloodline aura. This was his violent golden dragon domain. In the face of this enemy, who was very likely a limit Douluo level powerful being, he didn't dare hold back in the slightest. His violent golden dragon domain instantly enhanced the powers of all of his allies significantly, and among them, Sima Jinkai was the one who was reaping the most benefits. An extremely elated cry suddenly rang out from his dragon-slaying saber, and an enormous burst of suction force suddenly erupted from the blade, instantly dragging his body into it, causing him to adopt his martial soul true body state again. However, on this occasion, everything had happened automatically beyond his control. The dragon-slaying saber shuddered violently, and a peerlessly vicious aura abruptly erupted from its blade. Even the immensely powerful Bear Lord was unable to hold on to it any longer, and the dragon-slaying saber rose straight up into the air. Brilliant golden light radiated from the saber, and a series of symbols quickly began to appear as if some kind of seal were being undone. Tang Wulin immediately sensed what was happening, and as he unleashed his path of regal domination toward Bear Lord with all his might, his seventh soul ring also lit up. This was his martial soul true body. He didn't become a massive blue silver emperor vine. Instead, his suit of battle armor suddenly liquefied, immediately following which the golden scales on the surface of his skin suddenly became thicker and heavier. He had transformed into a golden dragon in the blink of an eye. The golden dragon was only around 5 meters in length, but Bear Lord's expression changed drastically as soon as it appeared. The golden dragon extended his front left paw forward, and the dragon-slaying saber up above instantly descended into his grasp. The saber was only gently slashed through the air, and a golden line appeared on the path of regal domination, surging directly toward Bear Lord along the dazzling golden path of regal domination. Bear Lord's pupils contracted violently, and he abruptly threw his head back to let loose a violent roar of fury. His dark golden fur stood up on end, and a fearlessly powerful aura erupted from his body. The path of regal domination was instantly shattered, and at the same time, Bear Lord swept his dusk gold dread claws through the air. Even though the claws weren't as intimidating as they were when he was in his giant form, they were still imbued with devastating might that threatened to tear through heaven and earth. Ding! A crisp clang rang out, and the golden line unleashed by the dragon-slaying saber clashed with the dusk gold dread claws. The golden line was destroyed, but Bear Lord's body shattered violently as if he had been electrocuted. He then immediately hurtled into the distance like a dark golden shooting star, vanishing from view in the blink of an eye. Tang Wulin's purple demon eyes enhanced his vision, and allowed him to clearly see that a series of rice-sized chinks had been inflicted onto Bear Lord's peerlessly sharp dusk gold dread claws by the golden line he just unleashed. The chinks weren't large by any means, but those were true dusk gold dread claws. As for why Bear Lord had displayed such a violent reaction, that was beyond him. The golden dragon's body swayed before reverting back to Tang Wulin's human form. This was the first time Tang Wulin had adopted his martial soul true body state, and it was truly a wonderful feeling. However, he was rather perplexed about why he had automatically adopted his golden dragon king form as his martial soul true body rather than his blue silver emperor form. After heaving a long sigh of relief, Tang Wulin turned to Arahang. "Are you all right, senior disciple brother?" Arahang flexed his right fist, which had been crushed by Bear Lord earlier, revealing to Tang Wulin that it had already completely healed. "I'm fine. It'll take a lot more than a broken hand to slow me down." Tang Wulin's wrist shuddered, and the golden dragon-slaying saber flew out of his grasp. The golden light faded, and Sima Jinkai also reappeared. However, he currently wore a very peculiar expression, and he was looking at Tang Wulin as if he had seen a ghost. Tang Wulin was also looking back at him in a very perplexed manner. He didn't know why the situation from before had happened, either. They had all departed from the Blood God Legion base in high spirits, yet they had encountered such a powerful being after really only just beginning their journey. Tang Wulin wasn't feeling smug or pleased that they had managed to force Bear Lord into retreat. Instead, he was filled with wariness and caution. It was undoubtedly the case that Bear Lord definitely possessed the power to wipe out their entire squad, and he had only been reduced to such a sorry state as he didn't know enough about his enemies. Tang Wulin, Arahang, and Sima Jinkai had already unleashed all of their most powerful trump cards, and Sima Jinkai's dragon-slaying saber had even taken on an unexpected transformation in the end, but they were still unable to truly harm Bear Lord. The three of them were the most powerful members of the Blood Dragon squad, but in reality, it was instead Long Yakshu who had turned the tides of that battle. As such, after exchanging a few glances, all three of them turned to appraise Long Yakshu in the end. Just what was that soul gun of hers? How had it managed to wound Bear Lord despite his immensely powerful defenses? Let's descend onto the ground and find a place to rest. Everyone required some time to recuperate, and there was no telling if and when Bear Lord would suddenly return. Tang Wulin didn't know why Bear Lord was so intent on killing him, but he had to make sure that everyone was in the best possible condition to face him should he decide to return. Thus, everyone landed on the ground, and Tang Wulin knew that his top priority was to understand more about his new set of companions. He had thought that he possessed a good understanding of everyone's abilities, as he had faced Arahang and Sima Jinkai in battle in the past, and he had fought alongside everyone else during prior battles against the Abyssal Plane. However, it now appeared that he didn't know anywhere near as much about his companions as he thought he did, so he had to learn more about them. The members of the Blood Dragon squad quickly constructed a makeshift fort, and all types of sensory devices and miniature radars were quickly set up. It took less than 10 minutes for the 24 black mechas to establish the fort, and Arahang didn't know much about military operations, so he wasn't overly surprised by this, but Sima Jinkai was so astonished that there were veins bulging on his forehead. He had always thought that the Southern Legion was the Federation's most powerful legion, yet just from witnessing these super black mechas alone, it had become quite apparent to him that the Southern Legion couldn't even hold a candle to the Blood God Legion. One had to realize that all black mecha pilots in any legion were extremely proud and arrogant, and every single one of them held very important positions in their respective legions. Black mecha pilots were all at least colonels and corps commanders, but what about these black mecha pilots? These 24 black mecha pilots were like the most ordinary soldiers, willing to follow all of Tang Wulin's orders without any complaints or objections. Furthermore, they were far more efficient than black mecha pilots from other legions, and even setting aside how advanced these black mechas were, just the weapons that they were equipped with were quite alluring to Sima Jinkai, even though he never even used mechas. Not only had Long Yakshu's blue laser wounded Bear Lord, all of the other black mechas' red lasers had also managed to injure him. What kind of super weapons were these? They definitely weren't readily available to any other legion in the entire Federation. Tang Wulin turned to Sima Jinkai, and suddenly said, "Was that a soul fusion skill between us just now?" Sima Jinkai was still lusting over the weapons that the black mechas were equipped with, and he immediately turned around with a dark expression upon hearing Tang Wulin's words. "Of course not. When have you ever seen someone involuntarily use a soul fusion skill? He was feeling extremely dispirited. Right after Tang Wuling had released his violent golden dragon domain during the battle against Bear Lord, he had become completely unable to control himself. His dragon-slaying saber had evolved, and when he had fused as one with his saber, he had been struck by a sliver of enlightenment that took him closer to make the elusive breakthrough. But that was all beside the point. The fact of the matter was that he had become completely unable to control his own powers, and he had even been forced to adopt his martial soul true body form just so he could be used as a weapon by someone else. Chapter 1128. A wry smile appeared on Tang Wuling's face. I don't know what happened, either, but it appears that your martial soul really is quite closely related to my bloodline. Sima Jinkai nodded in response. I could sense during our last battle in the Star Battle.net that I had made a breakthrough to become a titled Douluo, but I returned to normal after logging out. I came to find you in the hope of sparring with you to see if I can make this breakthrough in real life, but I didn't think that I'd encounter all of this. What happened back there? Did you actively exert control over me? Tang Wuling shook his head. I'm not sure what happened, either. When your dragon-slaying saber evolved, I was struck by an instinctive feeling that I should adopt my martial soul true body form, and at the time, it felt as if your dragon-slaying saber had become a part of my body. After that, I used it to attack before I really even knew what I was doing. Sima Jinkai's lips twitched upon hearing this. It didn't take a genius to realize what had happened. He had always thought that his dragon-slaying saber martial soul stood at the pinnacle of this world, but not only was it closely related to Tang Wuling's bloodline, it was clearly a subsidiary entity to his Golden Dragon King bloodline. With his pride and ego, this was quite a bitter pill to swallow. However, he had to admit that just being with Tang Wuling was clearly taking him closer to making that elusive breakthrough. Tang Wuling shrugged in a resigned manner at the sight of Sima Jinkai's dark expression. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're friends, after all. Sima Jinkai opened his mouth, and he really wanted to deny any friendly affiliation with Tang Wuling, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. After all, Tang Wuling had saved his life not long ago, and saying something like that would be far too hurtful. Arahang chuckled. You should just resign yourself to your fate. It's not necessarily a bad thing to act as a weapon for my junior disciple brother. Besides, it's not like you can change anything anyway. Sima Jinkai turned to Arahang with a vicious look on his face. I'd advise you not to run your mouth. I haven't even exacted my revenge on you yet. You better be on your guard in case I chop you into pieces. Come at me. Arahang raised his eyebrows in a provocative manner. Yakshu, what's the gun that's equipped to your mecha? Tang Wuling pretended not to be able to hear the quarrel taking place as he turned to Long Yakshu, who was resting nearby. She had already emerged from her black mecha at Tang Wuling's request, and his question instantly drew Arahang and Sima Jinkai's attention, both of whom also turned to appraise Long Yakshu. Even Bear Lord hadn't been able to ward off an attack from her giant gun, and no matter how conceited they weren't delusional enough to think that they could fare any better. As such, both of them were quite curious to hear Long Yakshu's response. Has modern technology really already developed to such an extraordinary extent? If even Limit Douluo could be killed so easily with modern weaponry, then what was the point in cultivating for soul masters like them? Long Yakshu remained completely expressionless as she replied. This is the newest technology developed by our Legion's research facility. It's called heavy iron laser. Heavy iron laser? This was the first time that they had heard of such a thing. Long Yakshu took an indifferent glance at Arahang and Sima Jinkai. This is confidential military information that can't be disclosed to outsiders. Sima Jinkai and Arahang's expressions stiffened in unison upon hearing this. Tang Wuling glanced at them before turning back to Long Yuzu. They're a part of our Blood Dragon squad, so they should count as members of our Legion. It's not a strictly confidential matter. Can you make an exception for them? Yes, yes. Please tell us, Arahang urged as he nodded in an eager manner. Sima Jinkai was working hard to put on an aloof display, but he was unable to disguise the burning curiosity in his eyes. No one wanted to face such terrifying, indefensible attacks in the future. Long Yakshu paused momentarily before complying. All right, you don't need to know exactly how these weapons work anyway. The red lasers that everyone else used are proton lasers. Proton lasers are very special in that they possess extremely potent penetrative properties, allowing them to be able to pierce through virtually all energy and physical defenses. However, proton lasers aren't very powerful, and they're like normal beams of light that aren't harmful to the human body. However, after research and development, we've been able to use these proton lasers as bridges over certain distances. When these lasers reach a certain depth into one's body, we can ignite these lasers through these bridges in order to damage a target's body from the inside, thereby resulting in direct damage to one's internal organs. This technology is already quite mature in our Legion, but due to its extreme destructive power, it's something that's currently only available to our Legion. As for the heavy iron laser that I used, that's still in its experimental phase, but to explain it in simple terms, it's a more powerful version of proton lasers. If proton lasers are ignited within a target's body, then striking a target with a heavy iron laser would be like detonating a soul bomb directly within their body. The main flaw of heavy iron lasers and proton lasers is that they have a relatively short effective range, and with current technology, they're only effective within 300 meters. Any further than that, and we won't be able to accurately detonate the lasers within the target's body. Long Yakshu's explanation was a little complex, and it left both Arahang and Sima Jinkai slightly befuddled. Thankfully, Tang Wuling was able to provide a simpler summarized explanation. So what you're saying is that these long-range weapons can disregard a target's defenses and shoot lasers that can be detonated within the target's body. Long Yakshu nodded in response. That's the general gist of these weapons. In practice, it's a lot more complex to explain, but you can interpret it like that. Disregard defenses. That was way too insane. Sima Jinkai couldn't help but ask, even battle armor and mechas can't keep out these lasers. Long Yakshu replied, suits of battle armor are above the 3-word level and red mechas can keep proton lasers at bay, but there's still a chance for these lasers to break through following sustained periods of striking their target. As for heavy iron lasers, only suits of 4-word battle armor have been established to be a complete counter. Of course, battle armor of lower calibers can also weaken the effects of these lasers, but that guy from before didn't have any defensive equipment, so the laser was able to detonate directly inside his body. However, his internal constitution must also be extremely powerful. Otherwise, that heavy iron laser beam should have been able to detonate his internal organs. Gulp. Arahang gulped nervously as a chill ran down his spine. His greatest weapon was none other than his body. He was the future heir of the body sect, and he normally didn't even like to use his suit of battle armor during battle. However, these proton lasers and heavy iron lasers seemed as if they had been tailor-made to target him. He had thought that his body was completely impervious after successfully cultivating the body sect's congenital secret method, but it appeared that his confidence was completely blind and unfounded. Tang Wuling couldn't help but heave a faint sigh. Modern technology really is advancing far too quickly. Were these proton and heavy iron laser weapons created to target the abyssal plane? Long Yakshu nodded in response. Proton laser technology is already mature, and if those abyssal creatures had managed to break through our defensive line that day, the proton lasers would have been used on them. Shooting proton lasers requires a huge amount of energy expenditure, but it's extremely effective against living beings without metallic suits of armor, so it had always been designed to target abyssal creatures. In contrast, they won't be very effective against mechas unless one can target the vital regions of the pilot controlling the mecha. Only after heavy iron lasers were invented was this problem rectified. However, heavy iron weaponry is still in the infancy stages of its development, and the one I'm using is currently the smallest one that can be used in a stable manner. Tang Wuling, Arahang, and Sima Jinkai were finally feeling a little more reassured after hearing her explanation. However, regardless of what the situation was like now, the fact of the matter was that humans had already invented such weapons, so they would end up in the hands of the military sooner or later. It appeared that the soul masters of future generations would have no choice but to learn to better use this modern equipment. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? After developing a deeper understanding of everyone's abilities, Tang Wuling was feeling a lot more assured. Even though the situation from earlier had been very dangerous, they had still managed to force away a powerful being who was essentially equivalent in power to a Limit Douluo that wasn't wearing any battle armor. This indicated that they had the power to oppose some of the most powerful beings in this world. Where do we go next? Our Hang asked. Tang Wuling opened his electronic map and used the GPS to ascertain their current location, then pointed toward a certain direction. We'll go to Bright City first, then take a soul train further into the continent. They were indeed part of the military, but the Blood God Legion had been established in the sky and mountain ranges to defend against the abyssal plain, and if so many of the Legion's black mechas were to fly into a city at once, they would definitely be discovered by radars, which would lead to a lot of unnecessary problems. Of course, Tang Wuling was still rather apprehensive as he mentioned the word soul train. He had already lost count of the number of accidents he'd encountered while traveling by soul train, and it seems that he and high-speed soul trains simply weren't meant to be. Bright City, the capital city of the Douluo Federation. Following the demolition of Shrek City, Bright City had become the largest city on the entire continent. It was situated in the western region of the continent and resembled a forest of iron and steel. Chapter 1129. Tang Wuling had visited this city with his friends in the past. After a brief period of rest, everyone set off on their journey again. Their lord didn't reappear, and no one knew whether he had gone away to tend to his injuries or if he was truly fearful of them. Prior to entering the sensory scope of the city's military radars, everyone emerged from their black mechas and put on some normal clothing. They then rented a few SUVs, and only then did they continue on toward Bright City. The Legion had already taken care of all identification problems for them. The Blood God Legion had retirement quotas every year anyway, so it was a very simple matter for the Legion to arrange some identities for them. Furthermore, aside from Tang Wuling, no one even had to hide their identities. At present, the name on Tang Wuling's identification documents was Long Yue. Dragon Moon. Tang Wuling was sitting in the passenger seat and looking out the window at the rapidly passing scenery, but his mind was constantly operating at high speeds. After departing from the Blood God Legion, he had lost his most powerful backers. Even though an alternate identity had been arranged for him, his powers were quite distinctive, and it most likely wouldn't be difficult for people to discover his true identity if they were to pay close attention to him. Thankfully, the final ninth grade soul missile that had been unleashed during the Shrek Academy bombing had provided a perfect smokescreen, convincing the vast majority of people that he was already dead. Furthermore, he hadn't made too much of a name for himself on the continent yet, and the people from Shrek Academy who truly came under widespread scrutiny were still the members of the Sea God's Pavilion. It could even be said that he was more renowned on the Star Luo continent than he was on the Douluo continent. If he wanted to revive Shrek Academy, it naturally wouldn't be anywhere enough just to rely on the members of his Blood Dragon squad. Even the Tang sect was still being oppressed at this point in time, so the first thing that he had to do was to unite all of the powers that he could unite under his banner. In doing so, he would at least be able to ensure that his efforts to revive Shrek Academy wouldn't be stomped out right away. His heart immediately began to throb with pain at the thought of his past teachers and peers of Shrek Academy. These were all people whom he had studied with and grown alongside. Shrek Academy had provided him with a warm haven that assuaged the pain of losing his family. But now, even this new big family was gone. His powers had been rapidly advancing during the past few years, and he was now finally a high-grade soul master, but he would gladly relinquish all of this power if it meant that he could be together with his family and friends. After all, his pursuit for power was all in a bid to better protect the people who were important to him. Yet now, he was beginning to run out of people for him to protect. He shook his head to shrug off these negative emotions, and his hands balled up into tight fists. Happiness was something that he had to fight for. He closed his eyes to organize his own thoughts. Everything that he wanted to do, including reviving Shrek Academy and finding his parents, had to be done step by step. The fatigue of traveling wasn't an issue for high-grade soul masters like them, and 2 days later, they finally arrived at the federal capital, Bright City. After entering Bright City, the first thing that they were struck by was the extremely modernized nature of everything there. All types of soul cars were driving along the streets, which were lined by countless skyscrapers that were extremely spectacular to behold. Occasionally, a patrolling mecha could be seen flying through the sky, leaving a trail of dazzling light in its wake. The law and order in Bright City was actually quite good, and the patrolling mechas acted more so as devices to get the younger generation interested in joining the army, rather than to actually enforce law and order. Ever since the Eagle faction had seized the upper hand in the re-elected federal parliament, the influence of the military in the Federation had increased significantly. War seemed to be an imminent inevitability, and even though Tang Wuling had been at the Blood Legion base this entire time, he had been constantly learning information about the Federation's current situation during the days leading up to his departure. At the moment, the Federation was spreading a lot of negative press about the other two continents, to the extent that they were even digging up historical events that had taken place thousands of years in the past. This was undoubtedly a blatant attempt to spread propaganda and create controversy in order to evoke enmity toward the two neighboring continents. Was war truly inevitable? Tang Wuling was absolutely against wars and conflict, but he had to admit that if a war really were to break out, it would perhaps create an opportunity for him. The three continents were situated very far away from one another, and if the Douluo Federation wanted to attack the other two continents, then it would definitely have to send its troops on extremely far journeys. Even with the invention of soul planes, there was no way for these devices to win an entire war against two other continents. Furthermore, even if the Star Luo Empire and Dou Spirit Empire were inferior to the Federation when it came to technological advancement, they weren't too far behind, and if a war were to break out, it would not be one that could be decided in a short time. A war would most definitely wield down the Douluo Federation's military power, and even the major powers would most likely get involved in order to reap more benefits in the future. What was the root cause behind all wars? They were all conflicts of interest. The Douluo Federation was quickly running out of all types of resources, and if it weren't for the abundance of resources on the Star Luo continent and Dou Spirit continent, the Federation wouldn't be taking such blatant steps to try and start a war. Seeing as there were benefits to be reaped, the major families and major powers certainly weren't going to just look on from the sidelines. In particular, a super organization like the Spirit Pagoda that had a presence on all three continents would stand to benefit the most from a world war. In order to improve everyone's overall combat prowess, the Spirit Ascension plane would definitely receive more patronage, and the Soul Spirits would also only become more expensive, and that wasn't even taking into account the huge number of soul masters that were under the Spirit Pagoda's control. Tang Wuling had recently heard a piece of news, which stated that the Spirit Pagoda seemed to have successfully developed 1,000-year-old and 10,000-year-old soul spirits. If this were true, then the Spirit Pagoda's status on the continent would receive another enormous boost, especially if they could actually successfully synthesize 10,000-year-old soul spirits. 10,000-year-old soul spirits would be able to provide qualitative enhancements to soul masters and also decrease the overall requirements on one's spiritual power. After all, a 10,000-year-old soul spirit could offer a soul master 4 soul skills at most, thereby allowing them to absorb fewer soul spirits. Of course, these synthesized 10,000-year-old soul spirits were also supposed to be extremely expensive. Ever since they had been released, the Spirit Pagoda had already made extremely significant earnings from them, and they had even voluntarily lowered the prices of the newly synthesized 1,000-year-old soul spirits, thereby resulting in an even greater influx of revenue. It was no exaggeration at all to say that the Spirit Pagoda was as rich as the entire Federation. It was always said that destruction always pursued those who became too great or too powerful for their own good, but as things currently were, that didn't seem to be a problem for the Spirit Pagoda. They had even become the main source of financial support behind the military's Eagle faction, and all of this information had been compiled by Tang Wuling during the past few days. It was undoubtedly the case that the Spirit Pagoda benefited the most from Shrek Academy's destruction and the Tang sect's decline. At present, the Spirit Pagoda had already well and truly cemented itself as the #1 superpower on the entire continent. Of course, it had always been the most powerful organization on the continent, but in the past, Shrek Academy and the Tang sect had been there to counteract its influence. However, these restrictions had already disappeared, and the Spirit Pagoda was naturally able to do anything it wanted without any qualms or inhibitions. With that in mind, the Holy Spirit cult naturally surfaced in Tang Wuling's mind. He had already had countless run-ins with evil soul masters, and the impression that they had given him was one of ferocity, cruelty, evil, and also mystery. Regardless of whether it was him or the other powers on the continent, there was almost no one who knew just where these evil soul masters came from, nor where they were currently situated and in what form their organization existed. No one knew even the slightest details about them, which resulted in this current situation, where evil soul masters could strike any corner of the continent at any time. They had even played a hand in the recent abyssal tide, and from that alone, it was clear to see that they were nothing short of completely demented. If the abyssal plane were to invade this world, countless people would undoubtedly perish, yet the Holy Spirit cult had still made the completely inhuman decision of siding with this abhorrent alternate plane. Chapter 1130. How would they benefit from widespread carnage and mass slaughter? The Holy Spirit cult was undoubtedly going to be the most powerful enemy he would have to face in the future, and even though he had his suspicions about the Spirit Pagoda, there was no concrete evidence at the moment to prove that the Spirit Pagoda had been involved in that bombing. As such, one of his top priorities was to understand more about the Holy Spirit cult. The most fearsome thing about the Holy Spirit cult wasn't its overall power. Instead, it was the cult's ability to conceal themselves under a shroud of mystery. A mysterious Holy Spirit cult was the most terrifying thing. When you know nothing about your enemies, they could appear before you at any moment to become your most formidable adversaries. The recent battle in the Abyssal Passageway was a clear example of this. If it weren't for the Blood God Legion's fast reactions and Blood Nine's willingness to sacrifice his own life by igniting his own flame of life, that surprise attack from those evil soul masters would have been enough to cause a massive disaster. But how could he learn more about the Holy Spirit cult? Not only were all of those evil soul masters very powerful, they were also extremely loyal to their cause. Any evil soul masters who were detained or cornered were generally dead before they could be captured. They had all types of secret techniques that they could end their own lives with. With that in mind, Tang Wulin's brows furrowed tightly. There were still many things that he still had to learn, and seeing as his enemies were still in the shadows, he had to keep himself concealed for now as well. Alternatively, Tang Wulin's eyes narrowed as he mapped out a course of action in his mind. After entering Bright City, they had to find a place to settle down at first. Prior to traveling further into the continent, Tang Wulin also had to learn more about the general situation of the Federation in the capital city. In particular, he had to ascertain the nature of the current situation following the federal parliamentary reform. However, just as he was preparing to find a place to stay, he suddenly realized that there was an issue. Tang Wulin wore an awkward look on his face as he turned to Arahang, who was sitting in the back. Senior disciple brother, do you have any money on you? Money? What for? Arahang asked as he rubbed his own large bald head. Tang Wulin then turned to Sima Jinkai, and the latter replied, I have a few tens of thousands of federal credits. Tang Wulin's lips twitched upon hearing this. He didn't have much money, either. He had failed to consider an extremely important issue. If it were just the three of them, then a few tens of thousands of federal credits would definitely be enough to support them on their journey. However, their squad consisted of 27 members, all of whom would require money for things like food and lodging. This was definitely going to require quite a large sum of federal credits, and prior to doing anything else, he had to resolve their financial issues first. Furthermore, a vast amount of money would also be required to rebuild Shrek Academy in the future. Tang Wulin massaged his own temples as these thoughts ran through his mind. He had always known that he would face a myriad of issues and pressures in his plight to revive Shrek Academy, but he didn't think that the first issue that would befall him would be financial in nature. After settling down in an ordinary hotel and having some lunch, Tang Wulin discovered that he had to further raise his projected expenses. All of the members of the Blood Dragon squad were cultivators at the primes of their lives, so their appetites were truly. He was finally beginning to understand why his friends had been so flabbergasted when they had watched him eat in the past. He had to earn money, but how was he going to do that? The first avenue of income that he thought of was forging. As a saint blacksmith, nothing would earn him income quicker than through forging. However, if he were to pursue this avenue, then there was a very good chance that his cover would be blown. After all, he was the youngest saint blacksmith on this entire continent by far. Wait a minute. Tang Wulin's eyes suddenly lit up. During his recent period of cultivation in the Blood God Legion base, he had forgotten many of the skills that he had accrued in the past. Thus, Tang Wulin called Sima Jinkai, Arahang, Marshan, Zhang Wuyu, Long Yakshu, and Ling Wuyu into his room. I have to go out for a bit. In order to keep ourselves concealed as much as possible, it would be best for everyone to stay in the hotel and wait for me. During the time that I'm away, who was going to be in charge during his absence? Tang Wulin's gaze swept over everyone's faces, and he was momentarily stumped. It was undoubtedly the case that Arahang and Sima Jinkai were the most powerful beings present, but neither of them had good leadership skills, and there was also a heated rivalry between them. As such, putting one of them in charge would definitely be a bad idea, and it would be a minor miracle if they didn't stir up some trouble. Marshan was a suitable candidate, but Arahang and Sima Jinkai were both far more powerful than him. Would they be willing to conform to that arrangement? Who's going to be in charge? Ling Wuyu asked with a smile on her face. She had clearly identified the issue that was troubling Tang Wulin. Tang Wulin nodded and said, Our Blood Dragon squad needs a vice captain that can be in charge during my absence. This is why I called all of you here. I wanted to ask which one of you would like to take on this role. Ling Wuyu immediately shrugged in response. Whoever it is, it's not gonna be me. Zhang Wuyu glanced at Marshan, and as Marshan's past subordinate, he also immediately shook his head without any hesitation. Arahang turned to Sima Jinkai, and there were practically sparks flying between them as their eyes met. It looked as if a battle were about to break out between them at any moment. Meanwhile, Marshan wore a troubled look on his face. These two were extremely powerful yet untamed, and he simply wasn't confident enough in his own powers to keep the two of them in check during Tang Wulin's absence. Right at this moment, an unexpected voice rang out. I'll do it. Everyone's attention was instantly drawn by this voice, and they turned in unison to appraise Long Yakshu, who was looking at Tang Wulin with a calm expression. I'll be in charge during your absence. You. Zhang Wuyu turned to Long Yakshu in a surprised manner. Long Yakshu shot a glance at him. Do you have a problem with that? Zhang Wuyu hurriedly shook his head. Ling Wuyu chuckled. Sister Yakshu wants to take on the role. That's not a bad arrangement. Marshan also remained silent as a faint smile appeared on his face. Long Yakshu then turned toward Arahang and Sima Jinkai. The two of them immediately stopped glowering at one another and shuddered in unison as both of them reflexively recalled the scenes where their lord had been struck by her heavy iron laser. That weapon was truly terrifying. Do either of you have any objections? Long Yakshu asked in an indifferent voice. Sima Jinkai had never been a good leader anyway, and he nodded in response. Arahang also shrugged as he replied. I don't really mind. All right, then it's decided. Is that all right? Her question was directed toward Tang Wulin. Tang Wulin looked back at her with a surprised expression. He didn't think that this issue would be resolved so easily by her, and he was forced to see her through new eyes. Long Yakshu said to Tang Wulin, if there aren't any issues, then you can go and do what you want to do. Do you need any of us to go with you? Tang Wulin shook his head in response. There's no need for that. I'm just going out to gather some information, and I'll be back very soon. Just get everyone to stay in the hotel, and if possible, try not to band together. Just lie low and wait for me to come back. All right, Long Yakshu replied with a nod. Ling Wuyu smiled and said, looks like you've landed yourself a good housekeeper, Captain. Tang Wulin turned to Long Yakshu, and she was also looking intently back at him. He wanted to thank her, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to do so. Everyone left, and only Long Yakshu remained. Need us to do anything, then you can contact us at any time. Also, there's something that I have to remind you of. All of the people in our Blood God Legion are well-rounded talents who are proficient in much more than just battle. If you need us to do something, then I'd advise you to delegate duties for everyone as soon as possible so we can get started right away. Otherwise, you'll be wasting a valuable resource. Long Yakshu said to Tang Wulin. Tang Wulin nodded and replied, You're right. I'm also considering this matter. Thank you, Yakshu. Long Yakshu shook her head in response. There's no need to thank me. I'm currently your subordinate, so I'm only doing my duty. If there's nothing else you need, then I'll take my leave now. Tang Wulin looked on at her departing figure, and a sense of warmth flowed through his heart. It was good to see that there were companions by his side who were truly thinking for his best interests. After exiting Tang Wulin's room, a slightly forlorn look appeared on Long Yakshu's face. Her personality simply made it impossible for her to give up on him. After all, she knew that it was impossible for anything to happen between them, but if she decided on something, then she had to see it through to the very end. After being shown the best option, she simply couldn't settle for anything inferior. Perhaps she took after her father in this stubborn facet of her personality. At the very least, I'm still able to remain by his side. Maybe someday. Half an hour later, Tang Wulin left the hotel in a surreptitious manner, and at this point, he had already completely changed his appearance. At present, he appeared to be a middle-aged man in his 40s with a completely unremarkable appearance. He had even modified his own body to be quite a bit shorter than before, which made him appear quite stocky and burly. It was very difficult to notice him in a crowd with his current appearance, and this was naturally a result of the disguise techniques he had learned on the demonic island. The techniques that he had learned on the demonic island could even alter the color of his soul rings, let alone his outward appearance. After emerging from the restaurant, Tang Wulin didn't immediately head to the Blacksmith Association. Instead, he hailed a soul taxi and provided an address to the driver. The taxi traveled for around half an hour before reaching the designated location, and Tang Wulin disembarked before raising his head to look up at the storefront before him. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.